This is BBC One for the East Midlands. Now at 10 o'clock, the BBC News with Hugh Edwards and Joe Healy.
Everyone in Britain could be forced to carry an ID card within 10 years. Fingerprint technology and eye scans will first be used on passports and driving licences. The Home Secretary says it's essential in the fight against fraud and terrorism. Also tonight, the Soham jurors visit the spot where Holly and Jessica were found. Private Lynch gives her version of the infamous rescue in Iraq. And silence on the 11th day of the 11th month to remember the war dead.
And here in the East Midlands, branded a third world hospital by the family whose son died after 8 hours on a trolley. And will he stay or will he go? Speculation over the future of Forest Manager.
Good evening. Fingerprints and eye scans will soon be necessary to renew passports and driving licences. These so-called biometric details will be included from 2007, pushing the cost of a passport to £77. The Home Secretary, David Blunkett, is hoping that this will prepare the way for compulsory ID cards in Britain within 10 years. He says it's essential in the fight against organised criminals, illegal immigrants and terrorists. Opposition to the scheme comes from the other political parties and from within the Labour Party, as Neil Dixon now reports.
It's been a long-standing liberty in this country. We go where we like, when we like. The authorities have no automatic right to demand who we are. But if the Home Secretary gets his way, we could all be carrying identity cards within 10 years. It used to be the proud boast of the British that ID cards were for foreigners. Well, perhaps not for much longer. Under the proposed scheme, the card would become compulsory from 2013, but only if Parliament approves. Cards would cost around £35 or £77 for a combined ID and passport, with concessions for those on low incomes. The cards would have a computer chip with biometric data, storing unique fingerprint or eye scan information, making fraud difficult, if not impossible. The Home Secretary told the Commons it would help tackle immigration abuse, terrorism and organised crime.
No one has anything to fear from being correctly identified, but everything to fear from having their identity stolen or misused.
The new scheme will be phased in. Within 4 years, if you want a passport, you'll need a scan like this. The passport will double up as an ID card. They'll then do the same with driving licences. Within 10 years, the government believes most of us will have an ID card anyway. Only then would Parliament decide whether we all must have one, showing name, sex and date of birth. The idea is you could use the card as a driving licence or passport and as proof of your right to work in the UK and to benefits like free NHS care. Even if everyone had to have a card, they wouldn't be forced to carry it around. But as far as the Conservatives are concerned, the whole scheme is half-baked.
The police won't be able to require you to have the card on you, so if they stop you, ask you for your card, you haven't got it. If you're an innocent, law-abiding innocent man, you turn up 3 or 4 days later. If you're a criminal or a legal immigrant, you just disappear in the undergrowth.
As for the Liberal Democrats, they say it'll be a complete waste of money.
It'd be much better to spend the billions of pounds on actually providing more police to tackle crime that way, and I think that's what the public will want as well.
The government insists, though, there is public support for all this, but even within New Labour, there's concern that compulsory ID is too much like Big Brother. Now, let's be clear, all this does not mean the Home Secretary is going to get his way, far from it. He believes he's embarked down a long road. His critics say he's gone up a cul-de-sac. Neil Dixon, BBC News.
Well, let's talk to Mark Mardell, who's at the House of Commons now. Mark, pick up on the point that Neil was making there. Do you think that now that we're going to have this new technology in terms of passports and driving licences, does that make it inevitable that we'll have these ID cards at the end of the day?
Not necessarily. I mean, certainly there will be lots of pressure from abroad. I mean, America is going to require people to have this, to get the visa waivers going into America on their passports. But David Blunkett hopes it is going to be inevitable, and that so in 10 years' time, most people in Britain, 80%, will have either a passport or a driving licence stuffed full of this technology, and everybody will think, well, what's the fuss about? And the debate will go simply in Parliament. But it does depend on it working and people liking it. I mean, just imagine if there's the great computer crash of 2011 and everybody stopped from going on their summer holidays. That would put a halt to it. So it's not inevitable. It does depend how it actually operates.
Well, does the fact that we've had this announcement today and the fact that it is, let's face it, a very big step forward, mean that lots of the debate, in Mr Blunkett's view, has been resolved?
I think he feels that he has won the battle in Cabinet to this extent, that he's got the programme going ahead. But I think the battle has been deferred. It reminds me a bit of the Euro. The government's decided in principle, fair enough. Many people think it's actually going to happen. But the debate, the heat has gone out of the debate because we're not having the debate right now. I mean, they won't even start talking about taking this decision in 7 years' time. Mr Blunkett might be Prime Minister, Mr Brown might be Prime Minister, Michael Howard might be Prime Minister. We just don't know. I mean, it's difficult to predict politics over the next day. You can't predict it in 7-10 years' time.
All right, Mark, thanks very much. The jury in the Soham murder trial were today shown the area of woodland in Suffolk where the bodies of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were found. Ian Huntley denies murdering the two girls. His former girlfriend, Maxine Carr, denies conspiring to pervert the course of justice and helping an offender. From Lakenheath, Duncan Kennedy sent this report.
The Old Bailey convoy journeying once again to the key sites of this murder trial. Effectively a courtroom on wheels, the jurors left Soham, the place the girls had lived, to travel to Lakenheath, the place where their bodies were found. Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr chose not to make the journey. The prosecution barrister, Richard Latham, said Ian Huntley could have taken a number of potential routes between the 2 points. The jurors' convoy weaved its way under milky grey skies across the heart of the Cambridgeshire and Suffolk fenlands. At one point, the jury were driven past these old people's homes, one of which belongs to Ian Huntley's grandmother. And then, a mile or two further on, the coaches stopped here. In Wellington boots and overcoats, the jurors were taken down this quiet, rutted path, with fields on either side, towards these trees. In the cold and in silence, the jury made its way along this track to this point, the spot where the bodies of Holly and Jessica were found in August of last year. Some members of the jury, 3 or 4, came over to this spot and looked down into it. Others stayed on the path. The jury also studied this tree branch. One of Jessica's hairs had snagged on it. At the end of the track, someone had left these paper flowers. The unsigned card with it read, "Soham's Roses. We have you in our hearts, Holly and Jessica." With no questions of their own to ask, the jurors drove back to London. Tomorrow, they'll retake their seats in court to hear the first witness in this trial. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, Lakenheath.
Next week's state visit by President Bush will test the Metropolitan Police to the extreme, according to Commissioner Sir John Stevens. Tens of thousands of anti-war demonstrators are expected in London. London's Mayor Ken Livingstone says Mr Bush should not be shielded from them. The Prime Minister said tonight the country should be proud of its alliance with the United States.
The UK is on its highest ever state of alert. Security at the American Embassy, a symbol of just what's expected post-September the 11th. Next week it will be on a massive scale, 5,000 officers on duty with all police leave cancelled.
It's going to test the Metropolitan Police in terms of what we have to do to prevent any attack on him or any member of the royal family or the cabinet to the extreme.
Oh, good for you. Impromptu walkabouts like this by President Clinton are off the agenda. When George Bush visited 2 years ago, protesters got right through to his convoy. But next week security will be in a different league. It's not just the terror threat, huge anti-war protests are planned. Tony Blair tonight seemed resigned to this.
The great thing about living in a democracy as we do is that people are free to express their view. But I think we in this country should be proud of our alliance with America.
Police expect upwards of 60,000 protesters who are against the war with Iraq. Their plans for the Bush visit are also well advanced. They're even constructing effigies. They want to demonstrate in streets where the president will see them, close to Buckingham Palace or Parliament. But US security advisors want that blocked.
The sort of ideas of some American security advisors that perhaps we should shut the whole of central London for 3 days, ignoring the economic consequences of that. I mean, I don't think that's got a chance at all.
Today in Tony Blair's County Durham constituency, signs of American security. They want George Bush to visit northeast England too, though it's not been decided where. And in London tonight, the flags are already out. George Bush himself will bring an entourage of more than 700 staff. This is a particularly difficult one for the police. They've got to get the security right in the face of the terrorist threat. But in our democratic society, they must also make sure that people are allowed to demonstrate. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News, Central London.
Surrey police have apologised to the Countess of Wessex for a delay in getting her to hospital to give birth last weekend. Prince Edward's wife had to wait half an hour because police didn't realise an ambulance had not been called. The armistice, which ended the First World War, was marked by a 2-minute silence across the country today. The Queen led the service from Hyde Park Corner in London, where she unveiled a new memorial dedicated to more than 100,000 Australians who died fighting in both World Wars.
It was Armistice Day with an Australian edge, and it was as Queen of Australia that she came to dedicate this first separate memorial to Australia's war dead in Britain. But the sentiments were universal, and the silence shared with many others around the country and around the world. The memorial is Australian granite, carved with a mosaic of place names from which they came to highlight the battles in which they died. Across Europe, Asia and the Middle East, and most poignantly Gallipoli, where many believe Australia first discovered the qualities that made it a nation. Australia's Prime Minister, who joined his country with Britain and America in the latest Iraq war, said there was a warning in its shadows.
Evil will always dwell within the world. In the past, represented by armies rolling across national borders. In this new century, finding form in acts of indiscriminate terrorism.
There can be no weighing of numbers when it comes to death. Every loss is great. But for its size, Australia suffered the worst casualties of any nation involved in the Great War. In all, 101,000 are remembered here. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, Hyde Park Corner.
And still to come on tonight's programme. More taxis, please, and maybe make them cheaper, according to an official report. And Jerry Springer is just one of the attractions bringing a new crowd to the National Theatre. It's Veterans Day in the United States, and much of the focus has been on one soldier who wasn't killed in action and who didn't save any lives. Private Jessica Lynch is famous for being captured in Iraq and being rescued by US Special Forces. That's the official version anyway, but Private Lynch is now offering her side of the story. From Washington, here's Matt Fry.
The blonde at the end of the family table is the single most famous soldier to emerge from the Iraq War. Private Jessica Lynch, captured by the Iraqis, rescued by the Americans, and now printed by a publisher for $1 million advance.
There was just a bunch of gunshots and it was just shooting everywhere.
And to coincide with the book, The Interview, which every US network had been bidding for.
I was preparing myself for the worst. And then once I saw, the guys come in and I was like, okay, they don't look Iraqi. One guy actually ripped off the American flag off his suit and handed it to me. And I would not let go of his hand. I clenched to his hand because I was not going to let him leave me here. He was going to take me out. Those are my heroes.
Welcome home, Jesse. Heroes, yes, but who exactly? The question which has dogged Jessica and her bosses at the Pentagon ever since she returned home in triumph. Was there really a firefight during her much-publicised rescue? Probably not. Was she shot or stabbed, as the Pentagon had originally claimed? Definitely not. Today, even Jessica herself feels that she's been manipulated. But why?
She's almost become a side player in all of this business. There is this iconographic image of Jessica Lynch that has come to fill certain roles having to do with almost a representation of the innocence of America.
Private Lynch at the Women of the Year Gala, and next to her, Shoshana Johnson, also captured, also injured, but no book deal, no hero's welcome, and less compensation. Saving Private Lynch is a Pentagon good news story that has now backfired somewhat. In that sense, it's yet another aspect of the war in Iraq that has turned out to be a lot less straightforward than the people in the building behind me had ever imagined. Matt Fry, BBC News, at the Pentagon.
At least 3 rockets were fired into the heavily guarded zone around the US headquarters in Baghdad tonight. No injuries have been reported as yet. Earlier, the commander of the US Army said his forces would take tougher action against guerrilla fighters, warning that he wouldn't hesitate to use any weapon at his disposal. Let's join Ola Guerin, who's in Baghdad.
Across Baghdad tonight, explosion followed explosion. The detonations heard around the centre of the city. The target, as is often the case, the vast American compound, which houses is the heart of the American operation here of all of everything that the coalition does. Just a short time earlier, nearby, America's chief commander was promising much tougher action by his men.
He shot on this side.
From inside the school or outside?
Yeah. No, inside the school.
Looking for the enemy, American troops in Baghdad tonight, trying to find out who attacked their compound and how. Only the car park was hit, no dead this time. Earlier, British troops the target. Basra, 8:30 a.m. A rush hour bomb explodes prematurely, killing 3 innocent Iraqis and the bomber himself. Soon afterwards in Baghdad, America's top soldier centre stage with this warning.
We're going to get pretty tough, and that's what's necessary to defeat this enemy. And we're definitely not shy about doing that when it's required, and we will do that in a precise, intel-driven mode.
And here is some of that tougher action. Under cover of darkness this weekend, American forces bombing and shelling Tikrit, hometown of Saddam Hussein. Airstrikes for the first time since the war was declared over in May. After Tikrit was bombed, the town of Fallujah was next. And nightly raids now with brute force. Suspected guerrillas hunted out of their beds. Women and children caught up in the middle as men believed loyal to Saddam are rounded up. But if America's troops are getting tougher, the enemy is too. America's administrator in Iraq, Paul Bremer, has returned abruptly to Washington for talks at the White House with senior officials. No indication yet exactly what's on the agenda for those meetings, but these discussions are taking place at a time when America is under growing pressure here and when it's paying a growing price for its presence with a lengthening list of casualties.
Ola in Baghdad, thank you. We have to wait too long for taxis because there are far too few of them. That's according to a report by the Office of Fair Trading. It says that local authority restrictions on the number of cabs in each area should be scrapped and maximum fares should be introduced. Our economics editor, Evan Davis, has this report.
Cambridge did it 3 years ago, removed some of the restrictions on taxi licences. Did it work?
My belief is it has improved the service for the public. At the end of the day, the City Council has a duty to provide a safe and secure taxi system.
The Office of Fair Trading also thinks issuing more taxi licences improved things, although the evidence is quite weak. Anyway, it's by no means free competition. Some barriers to new taxis remain. So existing taxi drivers don't complain.
We have people coming into the trade, people leaving the trade. It's settled down now so that it's reasonably viable.
Well, whereabouts in Cambridge they want to go, 5-6?
About half the local authorities in the country restrict the number of taxi licences they issue, and the other half don't. And the Office of Fair Trading says this allows us to make a really clear comparison. And it says authorities like Cambridge reducing restrictions can expect the number of taxis to go up 30% and passenger waiting times to fall 5%. Big deal. Taxi drivers lose out from more taxis and more competition. In Manchester, restrictions remain, just as the taxis want.
I think if they put deregulation on the town, there'll just be too many and it'll just clog up the streets. I don't think it'll work that way.
It's very hard to earn a living now, and we're working 12, 13 hours a day as it is.
Taxi drivers now face a great debate on the future of regulation in their industry, just as many other professions have. The debate begins in a taxi near you. Evan Davis, BBC News.
There's increasing concern in Europe and America about the use of torture and oppression in several of the countries of the old Soviet Union. There are particular fears about the Central Asian Republic of Turkmenistan. It's a totalitarian state led by Saparmurat Niyazov. The European Parliament has condemned Turkmenistan for having an appalling human rights situation. Our correspondent Damien Grammaticus has gained rare access to Turkmenistan, one of the world's most secretive countries.
On Asia's ancient Silk Road is a country cut off from the world. Its people banned from travelling abroad without government permission. They're forced to revere their leader almost like a god. Turkmenistan is marking 12 years of independence. Much of its Soviet system is still intact. President Niyazov, its Soviet ruler, is president for life, merciless to opponents who are jailed and tortured. He's changed his name to Turkmenbashi, meaning father of all Turkmen. And he's put golden statues of himself everywhere. This one turns so he's always facing the sun. What you're not meant to see, but we sneaked some film of, are the riot police resting nearby. The Turkmenbashi never relaxes his grip.
The Turkmenbashi is a survivor from a different era. There aren't many like him left in the world today. Here in Turkmenistan, he is managing to preserve a system that has vanished from most former Soviet states. He's a good old-fashioned authoritarian who is reshaping this nation in his own image.
And not just his, but his mother's too. He was orphaned, now he's renamed the months. January is Turkmenbashi. April has changed to her name. Then there's his book with its own giant statue. Part history, part morality lesson, written, he says, with divine inspiration. Today's orphans learn to extol the Turkmenbashi's virtues from a tender age, and Turkmen children learn English by studying the translation of his book.
Now please help her.
2 hours every day for every student are devoted to the text. With Arminda looking on, the director of the Language Institute was effusive in praising her leader's literary abilities.
Such a talented person.
In fact, everywhere we went, there were minders. At the world's largest handmade carpet, a national treasure, one was observing. At the museum, one was listening. At the orphanage, one was watching. And although taken to the market by a minder, we really weren't welcome. But one night, with a small camera, we slipped out of our hotel. A woman we'll call Maria had agreed to talk, but only after dark, and hopefully away from the prying eyes. People are terrified, she told me. They're afraid to criticize the Turkmenbashi. You have to praise him and take part in the parades. If you refuse, they expel you from school, or you lose your job. It was the only time I spoke to a Turkmen, with no one listening in. Independence has brought the Turkmenbashi a golden domed palace. It's brought his people his giant book that opens for them at night. But the US government says they've entered a grim chapter in their history. It has serious concerns about the regime's abuses of human rights and about its deepening isolation from the world. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Ashgabat, Turkmenistan.
For the first time in years, Britain's National Theatre has started to pull in a different kind of audience. With adventurous new shows and cut-price tickets, the crowds have been flocking to the theatre, many of them experiencing theatre for the first time. Rosie Millard explains.
Jerry Springer's in town. An operatic version of the lurid American confessional TV show has just transferred to London's West End.
You can hush all your shouting, you can hush all your bitching, you can talk to the hand.
It's produced by the Royal National Theatre, and Jerry Springer, who's played by actor Michael Brandon, is a fan. Jerry says he wishes he'd had the idea first.
'Cause the face ain't listening.
Our show has all the traditional themes of opera. It has chaos, mock tragedy, farce, gender misidentification, the chorus, the chanting, people being over the top, the wild costumes. So it really is opera.
The National, which this year received £15 million of public money, is on a crusade. Jerry Springer the Opera is part of the National's aim to extend its appeal. When it played here last summer, nearly half of the sellout audiences were first-timers to the National. And a scheme where certain productions have tickets for a tenner has been equally effective. 25% of the audience for His Girl Friday were first-time bookers. 28% of Edmonds and a third for Henry V were also first-timers.
We're immensely proud of the waves of new people coming here. I think that's a consequence of adventurous programming and low seat prices.
Yet the £10 season has meant reduced budgets and less of the National's famous on-stage extravagance.
I think most of our audiences understand that if they're paying a tenner for the seat, they're not necessarily going to get Miss Saigon.
The National's missionary zeal continues with another cut-price season next year. Rosie Millard, BBC News.
Welcome to the show, Tremont.
We'll be back a little later with the latest on the day's headlines. Now it's time to join our news teams across the UK. Bye for now.
Hello there, good evening. Paul Varnum lay waiting for 8 hours on a hospital trolley before doctors realised what was wrong. It wasn't until he started having convulsions that medical staff at the Leicester Royal Infirmary found he had a brain abscess. He died the next day. Managers tonight apologised to his family and said changes had been made to reduce waiting times. Mike O'Sullivan's been speaking to Paul Varnum's mother.
When the painkillers started to wear off and he was in a lot of pain, he was asking me to help him. He was crying out, saying, "Mum, help me, help me." And I was just going, "Will somebody help my son?" And I was just completely ignored. And I went back and Paul just went, "It's all over."
Paul Varnum, seen here on the left, was admitted to the Leicester Royal Infirmary's casualty department last December. It was 20 to 6 in the morning. He felt unwell and had an ear discharge. An adjourned inquest in Nottingham heard that he was assessed by nurse Emma Stokes, wearing the scarf. She gave him painkillers and told him there'd be an 8-hour wait for a doctor. Paul's mum came to support him.
Requesting help, shouting out for help. And one of the women on the trolley in the corridor shouted, "For God's sake, will somebody help this woman and her son?" You know, so other people were aware of the situation and there was just no help. I mean, the security people down the Royal Infirmary were more helpful than the staff.
Just after 1 o'clock, Paul began thrashing around on the trolley. He was seen by doctors. A scan found a brain abscess. Paul was sent to the Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham. There was an emergency operation at 5:30 that afternoon, but he died the next day. Paul's family will get a full account of his care next year. The coroner wants a statement from every member of staff on duty that day. Mike O'Sullivan, East Midlands Today, Leicester.
Today has been a day for remembering our war dead. Thousands of people across our region paid their respects. The 2-minute silence at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month marks the moment the guns fell silent at the end of World War I. And today not everyone has been remembering just the British servicemen and women. In December 1943, 3 young men took part in the British Navy's sinking of the famous German battleship Scharnhorst. Nearly 2,000 German sailors died. 60 years on, the East Midlands men have built friendships with the handful of survivors.
At his home in Nottinghamshire, photographs transport John Wass back almost exactly 60 years to the most dramatic moment of his life. John was a 19-year-old sailor on HMS Scorpion, one of a pack of British ships that cornered the pride of the German fleet, Scharnhorst, north of Norway in December 1943. He remembers seeing the Scharnhorst at the height of the battle.
I thought, oh my God, how are we going to get out of this spot of bother? Because had she opened firearms at that time, we'd have been blown to smithereens.
And that was taken after the battle of all the gun crews.
In Derbyshire, two other former sailors remember the battle. George Eyre and Harold Thorpe then served on the British battleship Duke of York, whose shells crippled the Scharnhorst.
It was amazing because we were 7 miles away, it was total darkness, it was snowing, and it was a heavy sea.
Pounded by the British ships, the lone Scharnhorst finally sank. Out of nearly 2,000 German sailors, only 36 survived. John Wass helped pull them from the icy Arctic waters, and a comradeship was born. In a park in Wilhelmshaven, Scharnhorst's home port in northern Germany, 60 years later, Germans and British together come to remember the young men who died.
They were brave men, they were our enemies, but they were fighting for their country and what they thought were right, same as we did.
I picked the cornflowers in my wreath because the cornflower is the German national flower, and I got the white chrysanthemums for peace. And I hope there will be peace, because God, war's awful.
Sport now, and Forest manager Paul Hart is the favourite to take over the hot seat at Leeds. It's not yet known if he's been officially offered the job, but if they did come calling, would he wave goodbye to the City Ground? Mark Shardlow reports.
As the mist rolled off the Trent this morning, Forest and their fans woke up facing the prospect of a change of management. For some papers, it's almost a done deal. Hart's the favourite for the job, but not the only candidate.
I don't think Paul Hart will go. I think he'll stay with Forest. There's on about him going to Leeds, but Leeds have got a lot of troubles at the moment, and I can't see him jumping out the frying pan straight into the fire.
Not inevitable, but I think it's probable, yeah.
The bookies agree Paul Hart is the 2-to-1 favourite. The former Notts County and Burton manager Neil Warnock follows at 4-to-1. Gordon Strachan is 8-to-1, with Leicester's Mickey Adams 12-to-1. Meanwhile, the club chairman's issued a statement this afternoon saying he wants Hart to stay and continue the excellent job he's doing after completing half of a 5-year contract. Well, tonight here on Trentside, the fans are still speculating on what might happen. Leeds are saying they're in no hurry to make an appointment. They're claiming on their website they have a long list of candidates, but in truth, that's not the case. They've got no money, so they can't afford people like Martin O'Neill, who earn 10 times as much as Paul Hart. Hart certainly fits the bill, but whether he'll become Leeds United's manager, we'll probably have to wait a fortnight to discover. Mark Shardlow, East Midlands Today, at the City Ground in Nottingham.
We'll take a look now at the weather forecast. Tonight will be wet with rain moving in from the west. Temperatures tonight falling to lows of 9 Celsius. Tomorrow will be fine and dry with good spells of sunshine. Top temperature tomorrow, 12 Celsius. And that's how it's looking here. Let's rejoin Hugh for a national news update. Good night.
Main news tonight, everyone in Britain could be forced to carry an ID card within 10 years. As a first step, fingerprints and eye scans will be necessary to renew passports and driving licences. And the jury in the Soham murder trial has visited the spot where the bodies of Holly and Jessica were found. Newsnight's getting underway over on BBC Two, but from all of us here on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
Hello again. Well, after all that dry weather we've had over the last few months, it looks like Mother Nature is beginning to address the balance this week. It's looking quite unsettled with rain for all of us over the next few days. The first batch has been moving in during today, coming out of this ribbon of cloud, fairly threatening looking cloud. And it is actually giving some fairly heavy bursts at the moment across Northern Ireland. It won't last too much longer here, moving away fairly shortly. But Scotland looking quite wet through the evening, and that rain now beginning to move in across Wales and the southwest of England. It'll keep on moving eastwards overnight, taking a while across Scotland, mind you. It could be quite a wet night here, I think, but eventually that rain pushing into eastern parts of England. Clearer skies following on behind, some mistiness for Northern Ireland and for Wales towards the end of the night. Temperatures here dipping down to about 5 or 6 degrees, but for most of us, those temperatures holding up a little bit higher. As you can see, that rain's still there come the end of the night across the more eastern parts of England, and to be honest, it could last most of the morning, I think, across Norfolk and Suffolk, perhaps early afternoon, before it finally clears away from Norwich, with those brighter skies following on behind. It's a similar story for the northeast of Scotland. Here too, the rain could linger on for most of the morning, but for most of us, a beautiful start to the day, much brighter than today, some cheery sunny skies right from the word go, and that bright brighter weather, reaching eastern areas as well through the afternoon. By then, a few showers running into Wales, southwest England, perhaps Northern Ireland as well, but a fairly mild day really. 12, 13 degrees, where winds are light, feeling quite pleasant, I think, in that sunshine. But the winds will start to freshen up across the Irish Sea later in the day, and in fact we're looking at gales developing here during Thursday and some wet weather coming in along with those strong winds as well, particularly to the more western parts of the UK. And we're a little bit concerned about this development during Thursday and Friday. A deepening area of low pressure is expected to run up across the western side of the UK. Still a few ifs and buts about this one, I have to be honest. We're not quite sure how intense it's going to be, but there looks to be certainly potential for some gale force winds across the north and the west of the UK for a time through Thursday and into Friday. Northern areas most at risk, possibly severe gales for a while as well. A fair amount of rain pushing across along with that area of low pressure, showers following on behind. So as I say, a fairly unsettled look to things. Quieting down a little bit as we go into the weekend. Those winds taking a while to ease down during Saturday, a mixture of sunny intervals and showers. But then as we go into Sunday, the next batch of rain beginning to move in from the west. And don't forget, you can always get a 5-day forecast on the website bbc.co.uk/weather. That's all from me. Bye-bye.